Hi, I'm Kelly Neiman Anderson. I'm a traveling preacher. I'm a pastor who spends her time learning about the international refugee crisis. Thanks to a generous fellowship from Luther Seminary, I get to spend this entire year traveling around, learning stories and sharing stories with others. This past summer, my husband David and I had the opportunity to visit Europe. We went to 12 different countries, and in 6 of those places, we learned about how the local Christian church is serving refugees and immigrants. As many of you know, the world is currently experiencing a very large refugee crisis, something we haven't seen since World War II. In 1945, 20% of Europeans were refugees. And now, many European countries are hosting refugees from other nations. But it's important to know, in Europe, they use the word refugee to talk about any immigrant who's in their country without permanent paperwork. In the United States, refugee is a specific kind of visa. The United States instead uses the refugee term the same way that the United Nations does. A refugee is someone who has left his or her homeland and can't return there for some reason, either because their own government cannot or will not protect them, they're being persecuted for their religious or political beliefs, they're fleeing war or genocide, they're being brutalized by a military regime, and escaping to another country is the only means of survival. The Bible is full of stories of refugees and people on the move, but we don't use those kinds of terms. Instead, the Bible talks about aliens, strangers, foreigners, and neighbors.
These are just a few Bible people and Bible stories that involve someone on the move. Sometimes it's for a great reason, sometimes not so great. But these are the kinds of stories that I hear over and over again, even in modern refugee and immigration stories.
Because of those stories, it's not surprising that the Old Testament law and the New Testament Gospels, as well as Paul's epistles, are full of instructions that we are supposed to care for and love neighbors and strangers. While we were in Europe, we learned a lot about different kinds of refugees. One of the things that's important to remember is that refugees are not just from Syria. A lot of times in the news, we hear about the Syrian refugee crisis. But the reality is that international refugee work has been going on for 7 decades. The United Nations and Europe was already at its breaking point with refugees from Africa, Asia, and the Middle East when the Syrian civil war happened, and an additional 1 million refugees were trying to head north. But currently, there are over 60 million refugees worldwide. 1 out of every 122 persons on the planet is a refugee. Less than 1% of the world's refugees are qualified for resettlement in any developed country. In order for that person to qualify for resettlement, first they leave their homeland and arrive in a refugee camp. Many refugees never make it to a camp, either for a good reason, like they're able to find housing with friends or family and then return home, or unfortunately because there are no refugee camps near them or there is no space in a refugee camp. The United Nations runs lots of refugee camps across the world, and Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service and Lutheran World Federation supports refugees in many of those camps. Once refugees are in the camps, they have the choice to apply for resettlement. Of those who apply, only 30% make it through the application process. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees, UNHCR, is responsible for the application process for refugee resettlement. The refugees need to complete an application, a background check, have several references, have paperwork proving where they were born, who they were married to, and what country they're from. Then they also need to pass an in-person interview and a medical exam. Once they've completed this multi-step process, then the United Nations creates a large list of all the refugees worldwide who have been approved for resettlement. This number could be as high as 1 million persons at a time. From that group of refugees approved for resettlement, countries like the United States, Canada, Denmark, and others who would like to resettle refugees choose applications from within that group. The United States Office of Refugee Resettlement chooses to redo the application process for all those who've already been approved by the United Nations. The resettlement process in the United States is very complicated. The FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and Department of Justice all do their own background checks, as well as a medical exam, reference checks, personal interviews in their language, and paperwork approval before persons are qualified for resettlement to the United States. Even then, refugees must go through 30 hours of training in the country where they're residing, where they learn the rules about resettlement to the United States. These rules include learning English, becoming completely financially independent, equal opportunities for women, and education for all children. Once the approved refugees complete their training, they are then assigned a location to which they will relocate in the United States. Refugees never have a choice as to which country they are assigned to or which town they are assigned to. If and when they are assigned to Michigan, they will join Samaritas, an agency on the ground. The United States works with 9 refugee resettlement agencies. Those 9 national agencies have 350 communities on the ground through 180 different agencies. Samaritas works for the entire state of Michigan, placing refugees in 5 different communities. Currently, the United States takes in about 100,000 refugees per year. This is one of the lowest numbers of refugees we've received in recent decades. In 1981, the United States took in over 200,000 refugees, most of whom were from Southeast Asia. In fact, the United States resettled twice as many refugees during the Reagan administration as we did during the Obama administration. The goal for refugees when they arrive in the United States is complete self-sufficiency within 12 weeks. Back in 1981, when the United States placed over 200,000 refugees here, we used to give 18 months of assistance. Now, they only get a caseworker and 12 weeks of financial assistance. By week 13, all refugees need to have secured their own housing and pay their own rent. They need to manage their own financial support for all of their needs, food, utilities, clothing, etc. They need to be learning English. They need to know how to access healthcare in their community. They need to have a job. And they need to be coping with the emotional and cultural difficulties of being in a new place. This is a lot to ask of someone within only 13 weeks. Because of that, we know that caseworkers and licensed agencies on the ground are not enough. Caseworkers are only one piece of the puzzle. Congregations and community organizations which co-sponsor refugees are very essential. So is community infrastructure, such as ESL training, medical centers that receive Medicaid, public transportation, and community support for non-native English speakers. Volunteers make a difference on the ground. There are a lot of different ways that folks here in the United States can help advocate, donate, and volunteer in order to support refugee resettlement. There are a lot of different ways that folks here in the United States can help advocate, donate, and volunteer in order to support refugee resettlement. First, advocate. Refugees need to find a place to live and they need to find a place to work almost immediately. But this is nearly impossible. Without a credit score, reference checks, or the English abilities to complete an application, they really need assistance, employers and landlords who are willing to work with refugees. Also, local government officials need to know that supporting refugees is something their constituents want. A lot of city councils and state legislatures and governors have publicly come out against refugee resettlement. But the truth is, it's a federal program and it works through charitable organizations and local partners. There's no city or state government involvement. But frankly, Negative talk from these government officials can make it very difficult for community organizations to place refugees in a town. Donation is an important aspect of refugee resettlement. Because federal tax dollars are very minimal for refugees, we rely on charitable organizations. LIRS.org supports national advocacy and international work with refugees. Samaritas.org works right here in Michigan. Lots of local organizations need welcome boxes, furniture, and storage facilities in their town. If you live in Washtenaw County, consider volunteering with WashtenaWRefugeesWelcome.org.
Here's the list again of all sorts of ways you can advocate, donate, and volunteer in your community. There are a lot of good reasons to get involved locally.
The Bible is all about the stories of people on the move. And yes, the United States has been welcoming refugees every single decade that we've been here. But one of the most important reasons to resettle refugees and support refugees in our community is because it makes our community a better place. All throughout our time in Europe, Christian after Christian whom we spoke with said that their lives were changed for the better the moment that they accepted God's invitation to support and welcome refugees in their community, even if those refugees did not choose to convert to Christianity. Over and over again, we heard the stories of refugees who want the same things that other immigrants want: safety, security, freedom, and opportunity. One of the families that we met in Germany really made a difference in my life. Even though I'm passionate about this work, and I know that helping refugees is something we're called to do, sometimes I wonder, are we really making a difference? Then I got to visit Mainz, Germany. Germany has accepted over 1 million refugees in the last 2 years. Refugees now make up 3% of the national population. And the government is helping. The family we met gets to sleep on the floor of a former elementary school, and they get enough assistance to pay for 1 meal per day. Their daughter will get to go to school. By all government standards, they're providing a much better life for this family than they had either in a refugee camp or in the country from whence they came. But when we met Omar, Shora, and their daughter Anita, I thought they'd talk to us about walking for 15 days from Iran to Germany, about being moved from refugee shelter to shelter to shelter in Germany, from their lack of public assistance. But they didn't want to talk to me about being political or geographic refugees. They wanted to talk to me about their faith. In Iran, they converted to Christianity, and they felt that God was telling them to move to a place where they could raise their daughter in safety, so that she could grow up practicing her faith publicly and worshiping in safety and security. So Shora put 6-year-old Anita on her back, Omar carried 1 suitcase, and they literally walked for 15 days from Iran to Germany. In the 8 months since they've been there, they've gone to church almost every Sunday. And what they told us is that the church volunteers are the ones who made their community a better place. The church volunteers packed a backpack for Anita to go to school. The church volunteers invited Shora to crochet night with the grown-ups. The church volunteers gave a bicycle to Omar so he can get to work. The church volunteers are speaking up for refugees at city council meetings. They're making sure that schools have translators and that the buses are treating all passengers equally. The church volunteers, those community members, they make the town feel like home. It's stories like that that convince me that now is the time. God has prepared us for this time. God has prepared us in this place. People from all over the world are coming right here to our community, and we have the opportunity to welcome them as good citizens, but most importantly, as good Christians. We can love our neighbors as ourselves by providing the long welcome. They might change our churches for the better, or maybe we'll be changed. Either way, I'm super excited to continue talking about this work across the world, across the nation, and right here at home. Thank you so much.